Hey, everybody. Boy, that snuck up on me. Here I am silencing my phone. Done. All right. So, nobody in the chat yet, really? I mean, there's Hikane and one other person. So, anything I say right now will not be a really good instruction. But I've got some stuff prepared. I'm going to be reading off the screen here for the first, 15, 20 minutes maybe. So I will not be seeing the chat. If you type something in the chat you want me to see and respond to and I don't, cut and paste, put it back in there. Alrighty. So I'm sure we all have these. I used to be into the doomosphere. I was all about the impending breakdown of industrial civilization. I had all kinds of, email subscriptions, stuff coming into me. And of course, people just sending me stuff. But here's this guy, Dave Pollard. I think I interviewed him once. I went to my website today and I searched and I didn't find anything. So he's probably in that block of episodes that had to be deleted in order to basically save money on storage costs. So if I ever did interview Dave Pollard, that interview is lost to the mists of time. But he sends out this daily mailer called, actually it's not daily, I think it's weekly. It's called How to Save the World. And here, let's read his little blurb over here. Dave Pollard's Chronicle of Civilization's Collapse, Creative Works and Essays on Our Culture. A trail of crumbs, runes, and exclamations along my path in search of a better way to live and make a living, and a better understanding of how the world really works. Okay, so comic strips, particularly single-panel comic strips, always good. A few of us are going out after work to pretend it's not the end of the world. If you want to join us. Here's another one. Hang on, Pestilence is posting an anti-vax meme. And what do you think will happen if you do get on the couch? And finally, what happened to the light on the hill? Nobody knows. It's simply not there. It's gone out. It fizzled out. It's gone. It fizzled out. Where's the hill? The hill's been bulldozed to make way for a freeway. What did they do with the soil? They used it for landfill in a wetland where a casino will be built. What will the casino be called? It will be called the Light on the Hill Casino. So among the various things, links that he's provided, here's this corporocracy, which sounds gross, imperialism and propaganda short takes. And the first of these, and Short and the New Yorker, they usually don't go together, but there's this New Yorker article that he's linked to. All right, got some potty mouthery coming up here, so if you have... go away. If you have delicate ears... By Susan B. Glaser, You're going to have a fucking war. Mike Milley's fight to stop Trump from striking Iran. Inside the extraordinary final days, conflict between former president and his chairman of the Joint Chiefs. So we're going to read most of this. But before I read it, let's pop over here to this website. This is sourcewatch.org, and the page is National Security State. Looks like a wiki. The national security state, or doctrine, generally refers to the ideology and institutions, CIA, Department of Defense, established by the National Security Act of 1947, an enduring legacy of then-President Harry S. Truman in support of his doctrine to support free peoples who are resisting attempted subjugation by armed minorities or by outside pressures. Let's see. So, this explains the transformative process that ended the ultimate demise of the New Deal state with its emphasis on social spending and ushered in the militarist national security state. In his book, Brave New World Order, Jack Nelson Palmyre identified 7 characteristics of the national security state. So I'm going to continue reading from this website, but for y'all, I'm popping over to this groovy presentation that I created on Visme earlier today. This is my first such presentation, so savor it. So the first characteristic of the national security state is that the military is the highest authority. In a national security state, the military not only guarantees the security of the state against all internal and external enemies, it has enough power to determine the overall direction of the society. In a national security state, the military exerts important influence over political, economic, as well as military affairs. A second defining feature of a national security state is that political democracy and democratic elections are viewed with suspicion, contempt, or in terms of political expediency. National security states often maintain an appearance of democracy. However, ultimate power rests with the military or within a broader national security establishment. A third characteristic of a national security state is that the military and related sectors wield substantial political and economic power. They do so in the context of an ideology which stresses that freedom and development are possible only when capital is concentrated in the hands of the elite. A fourth feature of the national security state is its obsession with its enemies. There are enemies of the state everywhere. Defending against external and/or internal enemies becomes a leading preoccupation of the state, a distorting factor in the economy, and a major source of national identity and purpose. A fifth ideological foundation of a national security state is that the enemies of the state are cunning and ruthless. Therefore, any means used to destroy or control these enemies is justified. A sixth characteristic of a national security state is that it restricts public debate and limits popular participation through secrecy or intimidation. Authentic democracy depends on participation of the people. National security states limit such participation in a number of ways. They sow fear and thereby narrow the range of public debate. They restrict and distort information, and they define policies in secret and implement those policies through covert channels and clandestine activities. The state justifies such actions through rhetorical pleas of higher purpose and vague appeals to national security. Finally, the church is expected, I guess I was already on finally, wasn't I? There we are. The church is expected to mobilize its financial, ideological, and theological resources in service to the national security state. All right, and now a few words from Noam Chomsky.
Mainstream media gives essentially the same message because why?
Well, we have to look what the message is. First of all, the message is one of remarkable subordination to power. Now, power in the United States doesn't happen to be in the state. It's not a centralized military bureaucratic state like in the Soviet Union. Right. Power in the United States primarily lies in corporations and the corporate world. There's very narrow concentration of control over resources, over investment decisions, and so on and so forth. And that affects everything. Can't help affecting everything. It affects the government because this means that there's a very close link between governmental power and corporate power. Furthermore, just the ability to make investment decisions and financial decisions places bounds on what any government could do.
Yes.
Furthermore, now let's go to the major media. What are the major media? Well, they're huge corporations. Okay, the New York Times, Washington Post, NBC, they first of all are large corporations. So they're quite profitable ones, in fact. Secondly, they're parts of even bigger conglomerates, like, Westinghouse and GE and so on. Now, like any corporation, they sell a product on a market. This is a market, roughly a market, kind of a state-guided market society. What's the product and what's the market? Well, the market's advertisers. That is other businesses. So they're selling a product to other businesses. Corporations are selling a product to other businesses. What's the product? Well, the product is audiences. Now, for the major media, the ones that kind of set the agenda, they're selling elite audiences, privileged audiences. The New York Times, say, is targeting privileged elite sectors of the population. That's their audience, and they're trying to sell that audience to other businesses. So we have to begin with, just on the most elementary grounds. We look at a system. Suppose we're Martians. We're looking at this system. We say, okay, here are huge corporations selling privileged audiences to other businesses. Well, what picture of the world do you expect to come out of that? Then we begin to add other factors. If let's say you're the chief diplomatic correspondent of the New York Times, or a pundit on the op-ed page, and you want to really have important insights into the government. Well, we all know how that's done. You have lunch with the Secretary of State. He tells you the lies that he wants to appear tomorrow. You write them and you say, a high source in Washington. My intrepid reporting has discovered that a high source in Washington said so-and-so. In fact, if you compare the internal declassified record, you know, of, say, people like Dean Acheson's decisions, and you look at, say, James Reston's columns, they're pretty close. And the same will be true about James Baker and Thomas Friedman. And furthermore, this is an open secret. We know that this is the way. It's not a big secret in the journalistic profession that this is. Now, in order to maintain those contacts, you better present the world a certain way, or those contacts are going to be cut off. You'll lose your opportunity to have to appear, to have special insight, to have leaks, you know, to be able to come across with a story, you know, a couple hours before the next person, and so on. Plus, you'll now, in order, there's an interplay here which requires power in order to maintain your own power. That's another factor over and above the just structural institutional properties.
All right. Pop over to me. Here we go. So that was a shockingly young-looking Noam Chomsky. You could tell from the they weren't digital. Those were, I think, analog artifacts of a distressed videotape that you were seeing on screen there. And the aspect ratio tells you this was pre-HD TV era. So I don't know exactly what year that was from, but I think it was Noam Chomsky talking to Phil Donahue. And so that's, I think, probably from the late 20th century. The 7 characteristics of the national security state that we just went to, that describes the national security state, or, you know, what is also called the deep state. And that phrase, the deep state, long predates the whole anti-Trump cultural drama. Okay, that phrase wasn't made up in 2016. That is a long-standing phrase, and it is one that is sometimes used interchangeably with the national security state. Basically, there are operations, there are agendas that, you know, they don't have official standing, and they outlast any particular player who is in office. These are patterns which persist in the state, or in the case of the United States, for the most part, in what Eisenhower called the military-industrial complex, and what he rightly wanted to call the military-congressional industrial complex. Alrighty, so let's just run through these real quick. The national security state, military is the highest authority. The political democracy and democratic elections are viewed with suspicion, contempt, or in terms of political expediency only. Third characteristic, the military and related sectors wield substantial political and economic power. Now, with the deep state, the very important thing to consider here, I mean, given the last 4 years, the cultural dialogue has shaped up such that any reference to the deep state, any reference to, you know, persisting agendas that, you know, in the government, which are not official, they're not elected people, they're not elected representatives of the people, they're not the president, you know, they're not in Congress, but they're power centers that persist regardless of who is elected. The important thing to remember here is that these agendas and these power centers endure and operate consistently regardless of whether Democrats or Republicans control the House of Representatives, the Senate, the Supreme Court, and the White House. It doesn't matter which party is ascendant, which I think is lost, or largely lost, in the noise and the emotion-laden drama of the current, you know, era. So, a fourth feature of the national security state is its obsession with enemies. There are enemies everywhere. Enemies. Just reminding you, I'm not saying that all of these exactly fit the current moment, and in fact, in some ways, I don't think they do, and I'll talk about that in just a sec, but I just want to reiterate these because we're going to go to an example where I think you will see many of them at work. A fifth ideological foundation of the national security state. Okay, we got the enemies. So the enemies, you know, the enemies are cunning, they're ruthless, they are evil, but they insidiously blend into the population. It's really hard to spot them unless you have the ideological, you know, acuity to know them when you see them. But they're so awful, these enemies, that, you know, no measure is too extreme in rooting them out. The sixth characteristic is that it restricts public debate and limits popular participation. So, in the presentation, I had all the social media logos up behind that, making the point rather obvious. And finally, okay, this is the place where arguably it really breaks down. And this, I think, is more a reflection of the transition from the 20th century to the 21st. Finally, the church is expected to mobilize its financial, ideological, and theological resources in service to the national security state. I also have to admit, I don't go to church. Haven't gone to church regularly since I was a child, so I'm not in a position to judge what role the church plays in this day and age. And on those rare occasions when I do go to church, it's usually in Arkansas. And I live in New England now, and I'm sure that the role that the clergy plays in Arkansas is rather different than what it plays here in... It's probably different in window dressing respects. It's different in its factional emphasis. But I think actually it probably does play the same role. The question is it still a substantial role? Europe is largely post-religious at this point. When I lived in New York City, I went to a rave in a church once. There's lots of empty churches, because, a lot fewer people are actively participating in religious congregations than did at the time when those buildings were built. All right, so Noam Chomsky was saying, the purpose of the big media is to push the message of power out to elite audiences and to sell those elite audiences to advertisers. Well, when we think about elite audiences, when we think about, the intellectual tastemakers and opinion and thought leaders, particularly on the coasts, well, what's a more fitting example than The New Yorker? Known for very long articles, articles that are easy to start and hard to finish often. This one is mercifully short, but I think you'll see it's mercifully short on content as well. So here's the man. Colin, if you would, go back to the screen. Here's the man. So, General... what's his name? Mark Milley, chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. He is the main player in, what you're about to read. What you'll hear me read and what you'll see on screen is what General Milley here funneled to the author, Susan B. Glasser. All righty. The last time that General Mark Milley, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, spoke with President Donald Trump was on January 3rd, 2021. The subject of the Sunday afternoon meeting at the White House was Iran's nuclear program. For the past several months, Milley had been engaged in an alarmed effort to ensure that Trump did not embark on a military conflict with Iran as part of his quixotic campaign to overturn the results of the 2020 election and remain in power. The chairman secretly feared that Trump would insist on launching a strike on Iranian interests that could set off a full-blown war. Now, let's go back to the title of this article. You're going to have a fucking war. Mark Milley's fight to stop Trump from striking Iran inside the extraordinary final days conflict between the former president and his chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. So this is being presented as a conflict between Trump and General Mark Milley and the rest of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. Now, I want you to watch for, in the narrative, where Trump's active participation in this conflict comes up. So far, all we've got is, in the final months, Milley was engaged in an alarmed effort to ensure that Trump did not embark on the military conflict. So we don't know what the general did, and we don't know what Trump did in this conflict. Next paragraph. There were two nightmare scenarios that Milley told associates for the period after the November 3rd election, which resulted in Trump's defeat, but not his concession. One was that Trump would try, quote, to use the military on the streets of America to prevent the legitimate peaceful transfer of power, close quote. The other was an external crisis involving Iran. It was not public at the time, but Milley believed that the nation had come close, quote, very close, close quote, to conflict with the Islamic Republic. This dangerous post-election period, Milley said, was all because of Trump's Hitler-like embrace of the big lie that the election had been stolen from him. Milley feared it was Trump's Reichstag moment in which, like Adolf Hitler in 1933, he would manufacture a crisis in order to swoop in and rescue the nation from it. Okay, so we're two paragraphs in. we've got our obligatory Hitler comparison, and what do we have from Donald Trump? Even from the perspective of the person telling the tale to the reporter and the reporter relaying it to you, not a reporter, an opinion writer. What has Trump done so far? Nothing. This is all, even as it's reported, it is reported as a conflict within the mind of General Milley. He has fears. He's afraid that Trump is going to do something. He is concerned. But we have no description whatsoever of what Donald Trump has done. Third paragraph. To prevent such an outcome, Milley had, since late in 2020, been having morning phone meetings at 8 a.m. Oh, good gosh, 8 a.m. on most days with the White House Chief of Staff, Mark Meadows, and Secretary of State, Mike Pompeo, in the hopes of getting the country safely through to Joe Biden's inauguration. The chairman, a burly four-starred Army general who had been appointed to the post by Trump in 2019, referred to these meetings with his staff as the, quote, land the plane, close quote, calls. As in, quote, both engines are out, the landing gear are stuck, we're in an emergency situation, our job is to land this plane safely and to do a peaceful transfer of power the 20th of January, close quote. Again, what's Trump's participation in this conflict so far? So far, the conflict is all inside the head and the emotions of the general. Now, did he really have these emotions? It's expedient of him to say, 6 months after the fact, that he did, and to tell it to a writer for The New Yorker. Next paragraph. This extraordinary confrontation, we've had no confrontation yet outside of the skull of General Milley, this extraordinary confrontation between the nation's top military official and the commander-in-chief had been building throughout 2020. Where's the confrontation? The general has daily phone calls with his own staff. That's the form this confrontation has taken, in the general's words. Before the election, Milley had drafted a plan for how to handle the perilous period leading up to the inauguration. He outlined 4 goals. First, to make sure that the U.S. didn't unnecessarily go to war overseas. Yes, the Pentagon has always been really, really worried about getting the U.S. entangled in overseas conflicts. They've been really scrupulous about that in the past. Definitely keeping presidents on short leashes when it comes to the, deploying troops overseas at our 800 overseas military bases. Before the election, Milley had drafted a plan for how to handle the perilous period leading up to the inauguration. He outlined 4 goals. First, to make sure that the U.S. didn't unnecessarily go to war overseas. Second, to make sure that U.S. troops were not used on the streets of America against the American people. U.S. troops have been deployed to the streets of the United States this year, but it wasn't Donald Trump that ordered that. For the purpose of keeping Trump in power. Third, to maintain the military's integrity. No comment. And lastly, to maintain his own integrity. He referred back to them often in conversations with others. So, Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, in these emergency land the plane meetings, he wants to prevent the United States from getting into an overseas war unnecessarily. And 2, to prevent the deployment of U.S. troops onto American streets in order to keep Trump in office. That in order to is very important because he had no objection to deploying troops after January 6th. Next paragraph. As the crisis with Trump unfolded and the chairman's worst-case fears about the president not accepting defeat seemed to come true, how? They don't say. Milley repeatedly met in private with the Joint Chiefs. Isn't that his job? I mean, he's the chairman. Isn't he supposed to meet with them? He told them to make sure there was no unlawful orders from Trump and not to carry out any such orders without calling him first. Almost a conscious echo of the final days of Richard Nixon, when Nixon's defense secretary, James Schlesinger, reportedly warned the military not to act on any orders from the White House to launch a nuclear strike without first checking with him or with the National Security Advisor, Henry Kissinger. Okay, so we have got a Trump or a Hitler comparison in the second paragraph, and now, because, negative associations, we're going to apply the Nixon filter as well. Because Nixon was a drunk and a pill addict and out of his mind toward the end of his administration, and people around him thought that there was a very real danger that he would do something crazy like that. We can invoke that, apply it to Trump with no justification given for applying it to Trump. And, if you're a New Yorker reader, this is par for the course. You are expected to take this. You're expected to believe this and see nothing wrong with this narrative as it's been presented. But again, even as the narrative is presented, what is Donald Trump's role in this conflict? He's not a participant. All right. At one meeting with the Joint Chiefs in Milley's Pentagon office, the chairman invoked Benjamin Franklin's famous line saying they should all hang together. To concerned members of Congress, including Speaker Nancy Pelosi and Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell, and also emissaries from the incoming Biden administration, Milley also put out the word Trump might attempt a coup, but he would fail because he would never succeed in co-opting the American military. Quote, our loyalty is to the U.S. Constitution. We are not going to be involved in politics, close quote. In relaying this narrative to a reporter or a writer, let's say, for the New Yorker, in the months after Joe Biden has already taken office, how is General Milley not being involved with politics? How is this not a deliberate shaping of political narratives for the benefit of, the power interests that he represents? And yes, this is snake juice. It is day 1 of the 3-day fast, the 5th week. All righty. Again, the headline, this confrontation. What has been Trump's participation in the confrontation as narrated? Nothing. He hasn't entered into it so far. This account of a behind-the-scenes struggle over Iran involving Milley and Trump, a secret backdrop to the public drama unleashed by Trump's unprecedented refusal to accept the presidential election results, comes from some of the nearly 200 interviews with a variety of sources that I have conducted along with my husband, the Times reporter Peter Baker, for a book on the Trump presidency that will be published next year. Okay, so authors saying there's all kinds of crazy stuff. It's too good for me to tell you about now. Totally would be relevant, totally might give some justification to this narrative that I'm presenting, but I can't share any of the details with you. You have to buy the book. Oh, and did I mention that my husband also works for a high-profile, elite opinion leading publication, the New York Times? All righty. So, where are we? Looking for a period. There we are. Some of the other details reported here about Milley's actions have been disclosed in recent days by the authors of 2 new books about Trump in 2020, Michael Bender of the Wall Street Journal, and Philip Rucker and Carol Lenig of the Washington Post. So, in this paragraph, she has invoked the Times, the Wall Street Journal, and the Washington Post, owned by Jeff Bezos, and been independently confirmed by me. Milley has not addressed the revelations publicly. No, he has just directed this information to you and told you what narrative to promote in the New Yorker. In a statement released on Thursday, reacting to reports about Rucker and Lenig, the Rucker and Lenig book, Trump said, quote, I never threatened or spoke about to anyone a coup of our government. If I were going to do a coup, one of the last people I would want to do it with is General Mark Milley. Trump said he selected Milley for the post only because he wanted to spite his then defense secretary, Jim Mattis, who said he could not stand him being Milley. Trump continues, I often act counter to people's advice who I don't respect. The former president posited that Milley, a career military officer, was allowing these accounts to circulate, quote, to curry favor with the radical left, close quote. So here's Milley funneling this narrative to a writer for the New Yorker who's married to a writer for the Times, who are their buds with writers for, the Wall Street Journal and the Washington Post. So here we have Donald Trump's actual entry into this so-called conflict after January 20th, long after January 6th, responding to baseless accusations that he was planning a coup. He says, look, I only appointed that guy because this other guy that I wanted to snub hated him. I wanted to make the two work together. I would never collaborate with that guy. He was totally in the dark. And I don't have any Donald Trump impression at the ready, so I don't even attempt it. Okay, home stretch here. Milley had been in full alarm mode since the summer of 2020. On June 1st, Trump had used the general as a prop in his infamous Lafayette Square photo op. Let's be very careful in the reading of this paragraph. Trump had marched through the plaza minutes after it had been violently cleared of peaceful Black Lives Matter protesters, and following him was Defense Secretary Mark Esper, a pack of his White House advisors, and Milley, who was dressed in combat fatigues as if at war inside America. Okay. This paragraph, this whole piece obviously has been edited, has carefully been gone over by professional copywriters and fact checkers at, the New Yorker, a high profile, prestigious not literary, but, they have pretensions, source of elite opinion. So this wording has been very, very carefully crafted and inspected and agreed upon. Consensus was found on this wording. So let's read that one more time. And I want you to pay attention. Is the author saying that Donald Trump was responsible for clearing Lafayette Park of those peaceful protesters in order for him to cross the park on foot and go do a photo op in front of St. John's Church? Milley had been in full alarm mode since the summer of 2020. On June 1st, Trump had used the general as a prop in his infamous Lafayette Square photo op. Trump had marched through the plaza minutes after it had been violently cleared of peaceful Black Lives Matter protesters. And following him was Defense Secretary Mark Esper, a pack of his White House advisors, and General Milley, who was dressed in combat fatigues as if at war inside America. Okay, so is there any causal language used there? Does it say that Trump orchestrated that? The violent clearing of the park? In actual fact, it doesn't make that assertion, but the way it's structured, it's implied. Now, is General Milley a grown man? Does he actually put on his own pants? Or is he a Ken doll that Donald Trump keeps in a drawer in his desk and puts on different outfits, in order to match the play set that he's going to put the general on that day? I'm guessing. I would assume that he's a grown man and he dresses himself, but according to the author of this piece, that might not be the case. So, we're going to pause here. And we are going to jump over to a piece from June 9th from Glenn Greenwald. Yet another media tale. Trump tear-gassed protesters for a church photo op collapses. Okay, so I'm going to skip the beginning. In the beginning, Glenn Greenwald he's summarizing the media storm, the, pearl-clutching, offended, aghast, oh my God, can you believe this jackbooted thug? He just ejected peaceful protesters. He tear-gassed peaceful protesters in the park so he could walk across and do hold up the Bible in this very fake, insincere photo op. Surely you remember that narrative in the media. It was repeated relentlessly, and that's what Glenn Greenwald is recounting in the early paragraphs of this piece. So I'm not going to read all that. Okay, so there were some denials of this narrative at the time, largely confined to right-wing media. ABC News mocked hosts on Fox News, one of the president's preferred news media outlets, who have spent the days since the controversial photo op shifting defenses to fit the president's narrative. Meanwhile, the Federalist's Molly Hemingway, in an article retweeted by Trump and a must-read, cited sources to assert that the entire media narrative was false because force was because force was cleared to use the park not to enable Trump's photo op, but rather because protesters had climbed on top of a structure in Lafayette Park that had been burned the prior night, and the park police decided to build a barrier to protect it. So the park police, this is the U.S. Park Service's park police, I believe. This is not the Washington, D.C. police. It's not, and it's not any agency that directly answers to Donald Trump. But as usual, the self-proclaimed superior liberal truth squad instantly declared them to be lying. The Washington Post's fact-checker, Philip Bump, mocked denials from Trump supporters and right-wing reporters such as Hemingway, proclaiming that a recent statement from the park police brings the debate to a close, as it proves the deployment of security forces using weapons and irritants to clear a peaceful protest so that the president could have his photo op. So this is last year. Here's National Public Radio. Peaceful protesters tear-gassed to clear way for Trump church photo op. This was the narrative. This was the claim, and if you tried to point out some inconsistencies or some inconvenient facts, you would be relentlessly mocked by the mainstream corporate media. Glenn Greenwald continues. All of this came crashing down on their heads on Wednesday afternoon. So this is a month ago, a little more than a month ago now. The independent Inspector General of the Interior Department, Mark Lee Greenblatt, issued his office's findings after a long investigation into the actions of the U.S. Park Police, USPP, to disperse protesters in and around Lafayette Park in Washington, D.C. on June 1st, 2020. Greenblatt had been around Washington for a long time, occupying numerous key positions in the Obama administration, so not a Trump flunky, including investigative counsel at the Department of Justice's Office of Inspector General and Assistant Inspector General for investigation at Obama's Commerce Department. The letter released by Greenblatt's office accompanying the report makes clear how far-reaching the investigation was. Over the course of this review, our career investigative staff conducted extensive witness interviews, reviewed video footage from numerous vantage points, listened to radio transmissions from multiple law enforcement entities, and examined evidence including emails, text messages, phone records, procurement documents, and other related materials. This report presents a thorough independent examination of that evidence to assess the USPP, U.S. Park Police, decision-making and operations, including a detailed timeline of relevant actions and an analysis of whether the USPP's actions complied with government policies. So that was a quote from the report issued by the Inspector General, and Glenn Greenwald continues, the IG's conclusion could not be clearer. The media narrative was false from start to finish. Namely, he said, quote, the evidence did not support a finding that the U.S. Park Police cleared the park on June 1st, 2020, so that then President Trump could enter the park, close quote. Instead, exactly as Hemingway's widely mocked by liberal outlets article reported, quote, the evidence we reviewed showed that the USPP cleared the park to allow a contractor to safely install anti-scale fencing in response to destruction of federal property and injury to officers that occurred on May 30th and May 31st. Crucially, the evidence established that the relevant USPP, again, U.S. Park Police officials, had made those decisions and had begun implementing the operational plan several hours before they knew of a potential presidential visit to the park, which occurred later that day. So I won't continue, but as you can see, the federal government has thoroughly investigated that incident and concluded with no uncertainty at all, that it was not carried out in order to allow Donald Trump to walk across the park to St. John's Church to hold up a Bible in a cynical photo opportunity. So now let's go back to the New Yorker. So this piece, this is from July 15th, just a few days ago. The Glenn Greenwald piece that I just read from, that's from last month. So the author knows that the whole Trump had the park police tear gas peaceful protesters in order to do a photo op. They know that that's false, that has been thoroughly repudiated and rejected. All right. Oh, I've lost my place now. Let's see. Milley had been in full alarm mode. Yes, he had. Let's see. Maybe I can do a search for Lafayette. All right. Milley had been in full alarm mode since the summer of 2020. Now, listen carefully to how this is worded. On June 1st, Trump had used the general as a prop in his infamous Lafayette Square photo op. Trump had marched through the plaza minutes after it had been violently cleared of peaceful Black Lives Matter protesters. And following him was Defense Secretary Mark Esper, a pack of White House advisors, and Milley, who was dressed in combat fatigues, as if at war inside America. It doesn't say that the park had been violently cleared of peaceful protesters at Trump's behest or in order to facilitate the president's walking across the park, but it references the narrative that we're all supposed to remember from last summer. And how many people who embraced that narrative last summer even encountered the Inspector General's, findings, his final report saying that that was all bullshit? I mean, I'm sure a very small percentage of the people that took that narrative to heart actually encountered the correction. And of those who encountered it, I bet most of them don't believe it. So again, the New Yorker, the author of the piece and the editorial staff at the New Yorker very carefully, very deliberately juxtaposed those two things in the cynical effort to trigger an association which has been debunked, which has been delegitimized, but it doesn't matter because they're going for the emotions. They're going for the stuff that's buried. They're going for the images that you have in your brain from last year and the emotional associations attached to those images. Again, remember what Noam Chomsky says. The people that organizations like the New Yorker are going for are the elite audiences. These are the wealthy, educated, influential people in our society. These are the opinion, these people hold opinions that other people seeking to climb, seeking status, seeking respectability, they will consciously emulate the style of speaking and the opinions expressed of this elite audience. This is the shaping of the narrative for the elites in the New Yorker. All right. I think that's all the points. That's as much as I need to read from this piece here. There's a link to it in the description. You are welcome to read all of it. I'm not stopping here because I'm afraid of something that, blows my nerve in the end. Just haven't really been keeping track of the time. Oh, goodness. All right. The military. Here is the general, General Mark Milley, 4-star Army general, chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. It didn't start with Trump. I would say it started with Bill Clinton, that Democrats who in the 20th century were supposedly, and I remember them, being the more, foreign conflict averse party. Of the two parties, the Republicans were gung-ho for the military-industrial complex, and then the Democrats made noises about objecting to some of the excesses, but didn't really do anything to stop it. But I think starting with Clinton, and this is really with the ascendancy of the neoliberal paradigm, Democrats just forgot all about any objections they might have once had to a globe-spanning military empire. It's not on their radar anymore. And so with Obama, we get the massive escalation of the drone war and the drone assassination program. Yeah, there were some drone assassinations conducted by the U.S. during the Bush administration, but the numbers of them, the scale of them, the regularity of them escalated dramatically under Obama, and Democrats didn't seem to care. They didn't seem to think it was a problem. Objecting to the excesses of a global military empire just isn't on the Democrat agenda anymore. And then with Trump, as the deep state coalesced to discredit and try to oust this outsider, Trump was certainly an outsider to the deep state, the Democrats, particularly the corporate media and the Democrat agenda in the corporate media, they went from not really objecting anymore to the military-industrial complex, to the national security state, to just fully embracing it and worshiping the Pentagon, the joint state, the joint, the Joint Chief of Staff. So the joint heads of the military, you know, their cabal, they've just gone into full militarism worship mode. And so here we are in the New Yorker. Here is this heroic figure. The image for this story is the heroic figure of the general looking stern, looking serious, in his full dress military uniform, and he's an object of worship for the audience, you know, for the readership of the New Yorker in 2021. So aspects of the national security state that I think, you know, the description that I read earlier, that don't seem to fit as well anymore is, I mean, certainly there is the use of fear to control the public conversation. If you say the wrong thing, you could get fired, but that's still mostly for race and gender stuff. You're probably not going to get fired. I know some people have been, but you're probably not going to get fired by saying that, you know, the deep state was against Trump, that the fix was in for Biden, that the election was fishy. I mean, maybe I'm out of step. Maybe people are getting fired for that. But I think for the most part, it's still really around race and gender that people are walking on eggshells at work or, you know, around people who could get them fired and online. But clearly, Silicon Valley has entered into, you know, this contest, this power struggle, these ongoing tensions between different power factions. And I think the influence of Silicon Valley is largely why the description of the national security state that I went over early in the live stream doesn't fit as well with the current state of affairs as it did with the state of affairs at the end of the 20th century. Okay, so that's a lot of blah, 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 and I've totally ignored the chat this whole time. There's not a whole lot going on in it. MAGA Hat says, KMO, talk about the Jews. Stop avoiding the critical issue here. Why can't you talk about the Jews, KMO? I'll talk about the Jews that I know. I tend to get along with them better than a lot of Gentiles that I've met. I certainly get along with, you know, particularly when I lived in New York City. Yeah, I hung out with a lot of Jews. A lot of Jews live there. The ones that I don't mesh with so well are the Orthodox, but, you know, they don't want to talk to me. I don't want to talk to them. We cross paths all the time, but, you know. Now, if you are suggesting that what I'm leaving out is the workings of a powerful cabal of Jewish billionaires who are looking to, I don't know, whatever it is your narrative says, eat babies, you know, I have nothing to say about that. I won't dignify it by even criticizing it. Let's see. Hikani says, is that a joke? From Mega Matt? I don't know. I know that on the right, I mean, I mostly respond to not the left. I mean, people who are friends of mine who are clearly, you know, self-identified like Marxists or anarchists, or you know how people on the far left really like to add a lot of adjectives to whatever, you know, noun eventually describes their political position. Folks of that persuasion do not consider the Democratic Party to be of the left. You know, they consider them to be liberals or neoliberals, but definitely not leftists, certainly not Marxists or communists. So it is mostly from the neoliberal New York, you know, opinion maker sort of narrative. It's that narrative that I'm responding to. And I don't respond a lot to the right-wing narratives, particularly, you know, the Trump-centric narratives. I talked about QAnon for a little bit. I followed a QAnon group on MeWe for a few months. And some of the stuff that I see there is so unhinged, so divorced from reality that I just don't really have any comment on it. It's just so nutty and out there. You know, it's just not anything I care to grapple with. But there is support for Trump among former Democrats. There is support for Trump among people who could easily, you know, go to a party the sorts of parties I used to go to in New York City, and deliberately withhold certain opinions and get along just fine and pass, you know, for an educated, normal person in those circles. Such a person can't be talking about the Jews. Such a person cannot be obsessed with George Soros, okay? That shit outs you as a nut, you know, as just somebody who is so addicted to the neurological rewards that extreme conspiracy theorizing provides, that, it's like a person on the street who is unwashed, very poor oral hygiene. They're not asking you for money straight off the bat, but you know that nothing they say is really going to enhance your life, and you're just looking to disengage from that as soon as possible. And for somebody who wants to know, who's angry that I'm not including the Jews in my narrative, that's just how I treat that. It's like, okay, we're at a distance here, so you're not physically dangerous to me. Just it's not anything I want to get embroiled in. It's not even a narrative that I want to, I hate to say it because it's such a cliche, but, now the cliche doesn't come to mind. I don't want to dignify it with a response. That's the cliche. Okay, Parker. Parker writes, there was chat, but the chat tends to disappear for you after a little while. Yeah, if I don't respond to the chat, it does kind of dry up. Matt seems to be trolling. Yeah, I'm guessing. Parker says, Ben. That is what a troll would say, lol. Matt says, you can't give a rational argument, so you call me a troll. I read a comment from somebody else calling you a troll, but it seems trollish. I mean, are you serious, Matt? MAGA Matt, are you serious? Is it the Jews? Does nothing about the national security state, about the intelligence agencies, about the Pentagon, about 800 foreign military bases, does none of that make sense unless we include the Jews? Really? I mean, if so, please cut and paste your manifesto into the chat. 3 minutes, says Colin. It's time for KMO to go. Oh, this is just getting good. MAGA Matt, are you Jewish? KMO stands for Kevin Michael O'Connor. Am I Jewish? I guess I could have converted. No, I am a former Southern Baptist, a former atheist. Now I'm somebody who doesn't feel any need whatsoever to apply a label to myself with regard to my religious identification, other than former Southern Baptist, former atheist, ambiguous, ambivalent, what's the word I'm looking for? Doesn't believe, not even sure belief is possible, agnostic. That is my religion. But I suspect when you ask about Jewishness, you don't really care about religious affiliation so much as ethnicity. And that's where the Kevin Michael O'Connor comes in. No, I'm Irish. I'm a Celt, you might say. I wouldn't say, but you might say. All right. Is there anything else in the chat? I'm getting animated right here at the end, but it is the end. We got 3 minutes. Well, probably like 2 minutes. You're just going to end it there, MAGA Matt? Are you Jewish? Come on, you can post. Oh, you can't post links. That's right. The Jews. Why am I not talking about the Jews? All right. Well, if there's nothing else from the chat, I'm going to sign off now. Thanks for tuning in. And if you weren't live, thanks for watching after the fact. Please leave a comment. And hey, before I go, let me just show you some websites. Colin, if you would. So here's a good one. Geb.io. Check this out. It's a comic about aliens and wrestling. If you haven't been reading recently, yes, the aliens are now in Los Angeles, and they are embroiled in a show that features Mexican wrestling. All right, another website. In theory, I'm a podcaster. I haven't done a free podcast since May 27th. But I do behind the paywall podcasts for the paid subscribers, and eventually I'll get some free ones out again. So crealm.com, check that out. And finally, patreon.com/KMO. So this is where I post stuff. If you are a $7 a month subscriber, you get access to the Behind the Paywall podcast. But if you just donate $1 a month, you get some stuff, access to stuff that is, occasionally I post things and I think, hey, this is for the dollar subscribers. But I also post stuff up there for free. So even if you don't plan to support me with any money whatsoever, do check out the Patreon page from time to time. as you can see, there is some free stuff to be had there and other cool people to interact with. All right. From Jews and Judaism in the United States Documentary History. Oh, it looks like Matt is going to start cutting and pasting the manifesto. I'm about to leave, but the chat does persist for a few minutes after the end of the live stream, so Matt, go for it. All right, it is 6:25. Colin wants to go. I'm out. I'll talk to you later.